Let's get more analysis. We can speak now to Amanda Makki, who is an attorney and a Republican strategist and former Republican congressional candidate, who joins us from Florida. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today, Amanda. We've heard President Trump saying he would love to deport homegrown US citizens, he said, specifically violent US prisoners, to El Salvador. Let me just start by asking you who you imagine he had in mind. Who could end up in a prison in El Salvador?
I think that what President Trump is really trying to do is to make sure that not only the illegals who are committing heinous crimes in the United States against Americans are on notice, but also Americans are on notice for crimes that they commit, and that they could end up in somewhere as awful as CCOT. So really what he's trying to do is portray the image that maybe our prisons are all too friendly to prisoners here in the United States, and the real threat of going somewhere like CCOT where it's terrible conditions. Obviously, these prisons, as we've seen video footage of, the Secretary of Homeland Security was there a couple weeks ago, and really seeing the way that everyone is, 40,000 inmates crammed into these really tight cells, the same meal every day, no protein, straight beans and rice every day for the rest of your life, would be enough to deter violent crimes from happening, because what he's trying to do is to stop violent crimes in the United States.
So just to be clear, people could end up in a prison in El Salvador, and yet they have absolutely no ties to that country whatsoever. That's what he's got in mind.
Well, it sounds like that's what he has in mind. It sounds like a lot of flexing too. What he's trying to say is, be aware what we can do and what the repercussions are for your actions. And I think this really goes back to the last 4 years of Democrats being in charge, and the last 4 years of large cities in America, more than a majority, I'd say a supermajority, are run by Democrats. And it has gotten so out of hand. Americans are very frustrated with the dangerous society, these dangerous cities that have been created with zero repercussions. We'll talk about shoplifting, but really we're talking more about, murders and really heinous crimes. Someone being torched on a New York subway in December. Literally, a woman was set on fire by an illegal on the subway. These are the types of things that he's trying to ferret out. But again, the shoplifting, it has really changed the dynamic of large cities. I was just in Washington, D.C., and you really can't even get deodorant without having to ask someone help you go behind the shelf, unlock the shelf door to get you something like that, because people are going in and stealing, committing crimes. And as you know, in California, they've said if it's not $1,000 or more, we're not going to prosecute it. So I think what President Trump's really trying to do is to address something that the American people are very concerned about. And I would say President Trump has a really good finger on the pulse of what is driving fear amongst Americans right now. And that is what's happening in large cities and small cities throughout America, but mostly in the urban areas that have been run by Democrats.
But the latest figures I've seen show that the numbers of reported, admittedly, violent crimes, according to the FBI, has actually fallen steadily since the year 1990. In particular, last year, there was in 2023, there was a downturn in the number of reported crimes. So you're talking about shoplifting, but surely a shoplifter wouldn't end up in a prison in El Salvador, would they?
I'm talking about crime in general, and those FBI statistics have been debunked. I think this was discussed during the debate with J.D. Vance and Tim Walz, and they used these FBI statistics, and then they later came back and changed them. So whether the statistics are, higher, the same, even lower, it's what the American people are feeling. And I don't agree with those statistics, just to put it out there. I would say that crime has risen in the United States. And a lot of that is economic pressure people feel sometimes, where they feel the need to steal. So we're talking about two different things when we talk about heinous crimes like murder, and then, talking about shoplifting and that sort of thing. But let's take the example of what happened in Texas 2 weeks ago with a young man who happened to be a twin. He was on the football field of his high school, and he went up to an opposing team someone who was there from the opposing team and said, this is not the section that you're supposed to sit in. And he was stabbed in the heart and died in the arms of his twin brother. This is in a suburban, nice area, part of, the Austin district of Texas. And so when you see these crimes happen, what is a family supposed to think when they have their kids in a middle-class neighborhood, a middle-class school district, and something as heinous as this happens? What about the family of people who have been killed at the hands of illegal immigrants? There was the young nursing student in Georgia. She was a college student on the running trail. She was stabbed, raped, and beaten, left for dead. The woman in Maryland, a mother of 6, she was raped, stabbed, beaten, and left for dead in Maryland. And these individuals have been prosecuted by a jury of their peers. So there is no way in the United States people don't think that they are not worried about what illegals are doing and worried about crime. Crime is a big issue and maybe one of the top issues in this past election. So President Trump, again, having his finger on the pulse, wants to do what he believes is best for the American people and really tap into those things that the American people fear. And that's one of the big fears that they have.
Well, a study does say that immigrants are significantly less likely to commit a crime than homegrown Americans, as President Trump referred to them. I don't know if you agree with that, but just really as an extension of...
As an immigrant myself, I hope so.
Right. Okay. So it's not really a question about foreigners coming to the United States committing crimes more than Americans who were born in America. I mean, that's...
It's not about them It's not about them committing more crimes. It's about the fact that they have been given a lottery ticket. They have won the lottery of life to come to the United States, just like my family did, just like I did. I was born in Iran. I came here as an immigrant. And if you come here on U.S. soil and you kill someone, yes, that is a big problem. And we are going to deter people who are coming here for nefarious reasons or that they have mental issues and choose to kill American citizens. And so should every other country. The only country I know that isn't and is prohibiting this is the country of Poland. Every other country in Europe is facing backlash, and their politicians are facing backlash because of this mass number of immigrants that are coming. And again, legal immigration, like my family did, all supportive of it. But when they're coming here illegally, killing our citizens, we're not going to stand for that. And Americans are going to want their leaders in Congress or in the White House to do something about it, and President Trump's doing something about it.
Sure, but if they're significantly less likely to commit a crime than people born in the US, and that's not the key thrust of the crackdown on crime, is that that's a sideshow?
I mean, people aren't going to say, well, the statistics show that, so that's okay. It's okay that a girl on a college campus in Georgia got killed by an illegal immigrant. That's okay. We're just going to let them keep coming. I mean, that's not the American spirit. That's not what we want. And I think that's where you have President Trump doing what he believes is in the best interest of the American people. I, as an immigrant, don't want to be around dangerous criminals who happen to be illegals. Why should they be here in the first place if their plans are to kill or harm an American in any way, shape, or form? It is a privilege for them to be here, and we don't have to allow them here if they're not going to abide by the rules. And certainly you're seeing that all over the country happen day after day. You're seeing violent crimes happening at the hands of illegals. So the Laken Riley Act that passed a month ago, the namesake of the Georgia girl that I keep referring to, Laken Riley in Georgia, these things have to stop. And there's a reason why there was bipartisan support for it. There's a reason why people on the Democrat side, too, who are more open borders, bring all, we'll take all immigrants here. They are concerned about it, too, because their constituents are asking them to do this. Their constituents are concerned about their families, their children. Again, look what happened in Texas just 2 weeks ago. And that didn't involve an illegal immigrant, but I'm saying these are the types of crimes people want to see prosecuted. They don't want to see people get a slap on the wrist for something as violent, as heinous as these types of crimes that are happening around America.
Sure. I just want to ask you, though, wearing your other hat as an attorney, I'd like to ask you about the legalities of all of this. We're reading some reports that say words to the effect there is no provision under US law that allows the government to kick citizens out of the country. I mean, maybe you can tell us, is the law quite clear on this matter of deporting someone who's got no links to El Salvador to go to prison?
Well, what we're talking about with regards to people who are being deported are the people who are not US citizens. So that's a different matter. If you are here under a permanent residency status or some kind of student status, some temporary status, there's definitely no reason why we can't deport you wherever we choose to deport you.
But what about these homegrown US citizens that President Trump was recorded talking about? Can they constitutionally be deported and incarcerated in another country, El Salvador or anywhere else for that matter?
Well, I think we've seen a lot of times where you have these things that third parties are responsible for our prison systems. You don't have every prison run by the US government. You have third-party intermediaries that will run these privately run facilities. And so I think there could be a constitutional question here, certainly. And I'm not a constitutional scholar to come down on this, and certainly the justices will be divided on this, I'm sure. But I think an argument can be made that if the U.S. deems that a U.S. facility, just like they do for private facilities, then it doesn't really matter where the location is, so long as the laws of the U.S. apply. So it's a constitutional question. I would leave it at that.
Sure. I mean, lots of countries have got third parties that manage their prison systems, but I don't think many of them have suggested outsourcing the prison to a different country, certainly the facilities management. Let me just ask you another thing, wearing your Republican strategy hat. We often see and hear President Trump floating these ideas past an audience, whether it's in front of the cameras or in front of an audience. What's the thinking here? Is that to sort of test the waters and see if an idea holds water in the minds of the electorate? Talk us through the strategy.
Well, I think President Trump has made it very clear when he has an idea and something that he is very supportive of, he'll go ahead and do it. And then he'll say, well, okay, now it's time to negotiate. So I think the tariffs are just kind of a perfect example. This is someone who's been talking about tariffs in a very positive manner for the last 4 decades. Whether he was in his private life or in public service, he's always talked about the benefits of tariffs and that they are, quote, a beautiful thing. So he flexed on tariffs. Other countries responded. 70 plus countries came, kind of hat in hand saying, let's negotiate. And, whether you look at it as this was a way to isolate China, whether you look at it as this is just the way the art of the deal works, I think what he likes to do is not go back on his word, implement it, and then say, okay, now we can negotiate. Now you felt the pressure. Now you felt some pain, and now's the best time to strategize and negotiate if that's something that countries are willing to do. So I do think that he's willing to listen. And I think a perfect example of this is if you just look at who is in his cabinet, you had Peter Navarro on one side and Howard Lutnick on the other side, his commerce secretary, people that are very close to him. Navarro went to jail for him. So, these are people that are very close with him. But ultimately, he sided with 2 different views. Scott Bessent, his Treasury Secretary, I guess you could say Elon Musk, who's been in the role that he's been in, supporting the president. So, he has differing opinions around him. And I think he goes with what he feels is best for the American people and for the American worker. So I do think in his way of strategizing, he's never going to back down on what he said he's going to do. He'll do it. But then if people come with different ideas and negotiations and bring things to the table, he's willing to listen.
Okay. One of the other headline stories of the last 2-3 days out of the Trump administration has been his ongoing row, I should say, with Ivy League schools, particularly Harvard at the moment. President Trump called Harvard a joke. What's he got against that university?
Well, they're not following by the laws. The Supreme Court ruled a couple of years ago against Harvard on their admission standards. There are students there who are not able to pass math classes or taking remedial math classes. And as a Fox News reporter said, this is a school where valedictorians don't often get into. So what they've done is they've denigrated the degree just so that they can abide by the woke culture, the woke standards that have, happened in the country over the last 4 to 6 years. And so what I think he's trying to do is say, look, you have to abide by what the Supreme Court said, one. Two, you have to make sure that you are doing a better job of screening the students that you're allowing into your university to make sure they don't hate America or hate Americans. And also, if you have $100 billion endowment, why are we, the taxpayers, funding $2 billion of grants for a university that is so well endowed? What about the historically Black colleges and universities in this country that don't have those endowments, or schools, for that matter, that just are not as wealthy and have the alumni base that Harvard does? So I think what President Trump is trying to say is he's trying to put all these universities on notice, whether it's Columbia, Harvard. He's just using Harvard as an example. But looking at all these universities, he's saying, check yourselves. Make sure that you're actually doing what is in the spirit and the law of the United States that you are supposed to be abiding by. In other words, stop with the standards that are being dumbed down to allow for certain races to be allowed into the university instead of people who should be there on their merits, like it should be. But he's also saying that, he's asking, why are we funding as U.S. taxpayers to the tune of billions of dollars to these universities if they are so well endowed and they're not abiding by our laws?
Yeah, okay, but I mean, everyone knows that students like a protest. They always have done. I mean, the US is famous for student protests going back as long as we can remember. I mean, Vietnam was a time when, in the 60s and 70s, that students were up in arms and on their campuses, burning flags and waving placards. They've been doing the same, albeit on a different issue with regards to the situation in Gaza, and yet they're being accused for protesting the humanitarian situation in Gaza, being accused of anti-Semitism. That seems to be very much at the heart, doesn't it, of President Trump's anger with this particular institution and other universities where we've seen similar protests.
I mean, I think it's a valid question to ask, why is $2 billion being given to a school with a $100 billion endowment? So let's start with that. Whether it's the anti-Semitism that Jewish students fear going onto campus because their schools are not protecting them sufficiently, that is something that has been in the news for the last year, and these schools don't seem to have done much about it. So President Trump wants to make sure everyone can go to school and feel safe to go to school and not be worried about someone who's a non-U.S. citizen, who's whether it's a green card holder status, a temporary student visa status. Those people do not have the same rights as U.S. citizens. And it is a privilege, going back to our previous conversation, it is a privilege, not a right, for them to be here. And there is certainly in the law a gray area that does not say that they have the same rights as a U.S. citizen does. So if you're coming here, be respectful, I think, is the first and foremost. You can protest, but if you're a U.S. citizen, you're protesting, no one's coming after you. But if you are not a U.S. citizen and you are committing what in any way seems to be anti-Semitic or in any way anti-anyone's religion, that is an issue. And that's what President Trump is taking aim at.
President Obama saying the freeze of funding for Harvard is unlawful. He's got a pretty strong legal background. I just wonder whether you think he's got an argument here.
again, they will take this to the courts. They will find the most most beneficial venues that they can in federal courts. And by that, I mean they go venue shopping to find where the judges are more likely to be liberal leaning. So there will be a judge or two here or there that will agree with President Obama's position, but ultimately, this will likely, as have all these cases that we've been seeing over the course of the last few weeks, go to the Supreme Court. And you have a Supreme Court that is divided, and they have, on some issues, reached a unanimous conclusion. On some, they've been divided based on kind of party lines, if you will, although they're not partisan, but based on who appointed them. So again, these are constitutional questions that will be put in front of justices that have lifetime appointments and should be making the best decision for the American people.
Just lastly, I mean, Harvard, as we've been saying, has got no shortage of money. A $53 billion endowment, as we've been saying. It's the oldest, the wealthiest university in the United States. And it's got this long list of alumni, many of whom are in the world of politics. I mean, a very high concentration of clever, powerful, connected, rich people. I mean, is this a risky battle for President Trump to be picking?
I wonder how many of those really successful people think that their degree has been denigrated by having students admitted who can't pass a basic freshman level math class. So I think that they are looking to see Harvard change its ways. Maybe Harvard has kind of gotten mired in this whole wokeism and admitting people who should not be there. I come from a family of doctors, and I know that residency programs at UCLA, doctors have said these residents that are being admitted, they should not be admitted to this school. They are not at the level of this school, and they have basic misunderstandings of medical classes, medical courses, medical issues. And so I think you're seeing this not just at Harvard, but in schools throughout the country. And I think people are concerned about who's being admitted into these schools and who's being admitted into postgraduate programs that are the next future generations of doctors, lawyers, engineers, and the like in the United States. So we do need to make sure, and I think the alumni, to answer your question, of these universities wants to make sure that the same standards, the same difficult standards that they had to go through to get into those schools, that they too will continue to administer that, not what they've been doing for the last 20, 30 years.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to have to leave it there. Amanda Makki, a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much again for your time.
Thank you.